This is Transqat, a safe space to stand. Transgender issues, queer people, respectful conversations. I'm host Clare McCarthy. Welcome to Transqat. Welcome back to Season 4 of Transqat the podcast. I'm joined today by author Sarah Miller. We're discussing her book, Hick, the Trailblazing journalist who captured Eleanor Roosevelt's heart. Sarah writes the sort of biographies that shine a light on the untold stories of women in history. Lizzie Borden, Mary Surratt, who was the first woman executed by the U.S. government, and now Lorena Hickok. She describes her process this way. I thrive on research. I want to stand where my characters stood, eat what they ate, wear what they wore. This is why I've brandished a hatchet and laced myself into a corset, why I can read Braille very, very slowly, and speak Russian. It's why I have slept in Lizzie Borden's bedroom. Before we get to Sarah, though, last season, after the inauguration in January, I tried to do a series of mini-episodes on the executive orders being issued by the incoming administration. I focused on the ones that were specifically targeting trans folks, with plans to include the anti-DEI initiatives. And I couldn't keep up. I felt like the White House, the Congress, and the Supreme Court were making smoothies in my kitchen, but they hadn't put the lid on the blender, and stuff was flying everywhere, spattering the cabinets and the fridge and frightening the cats. And you can clean up the mess, but then every time you think you've got it under control, one of them comes along again and hits the pulse button. And this frenetic pace, 6 months into the administration, shows no signs of abating. It's exhausting, and that's the intent. Divide, dishearten, distract. So as we approach our 100th episode, I will try to keep Transqat focused on its mission. Safe space, respectful conversations, stories of lived experience. And by continuing to welcome lawmakers, community activists, care providers, and creators, I hope that we, together, can pool our energies to resist, to support one another, and to stand. Sarah, when I first read this book, when you'd sent it to me and we were working on it, I focused on the questions you were asking, what you needed me to be paying attention to, and also the history, because I was not aware of Hick at all, and very limited amount I knew about Eleanor Roosevelt. So that's where my focus was. And I just reread it for this conversation, and I love Hick, the person, so much. And that was my big takeaway from the second time was this is somebody, when I build my time machine, I want to go back and I want to talk to her. I want to hold her during the hard times. Yep. And I'm guessing that for the amount of time that you spent in terms of research and then in writing and editing, you must have similar feelings about her.
It dawned on me very recently that, of all the people I've written about, she's the one I know best because of the mountain of information that's available. There's 3,500 letters. I dug up 700 to 800 of her newspaper articles. I read all of her FARA reports. So I just don't have that volume of information about anybody else in my imaginary friends roster.
I like that idea that this amazing woman who had this just stellar career in journalism and then plays this pivotal role in queer history. She's one of our imaginary
friends.
Yeah,
I stole that from my boss at the bookstore. Anytime you have a person that's beyond you because of whatever circumstances, time or fame or whatever, they're your imaginary friends.
Yeah. So when I find myself walking around the house talking to Hick, it's
right.
In all seriousness, though, one of the first things that leapt out at me about her as a person is something that she and I have in common, and that is a real discomfort with our bodies and the way society treats people with bodies that don't fit the norm. You quote Hick as calling herself hopelessly ugly. And wait, I want to make sure I get this other one right. She's because it made me cry. I simply accepted the fact that I was homely, and I did not expect admiration or compliments.
Yeah. And that was as a child. Yeah, she's like, well, that's that.
That door's closed.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to work our way through sort of chronologically, but let's take care of the spoiler first. It is 1978. Okay, the top movie in the country is Grease. Yay!
I did not know that. That's fascinating.
The top song in the country is Andy Gibbs' Shadow Dancing. And a New York Times reporter named Doris Faber walks into FDR's presidential library to do some research. What does she find?
She went in to do research for a children's biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. And the archivist said, basically looked at their watches and said, oh, it was like May 2nd of 1978 or so. We have this whole brand new set of boxes we're allowed to show people that's related to Eleanor Roosevelt called the Lorena Hickok Papers. Would you like to see them? And she said, sure. And so she opens the first box and reads for an hour, and it blows her mind to bits because that first box is the most intimate correspondence, pretty much, starting in there's a few in 1932, but 1933 between Lorena Hickok and Eleanor Roosevelt, right after the inauguration. And right out of the gate, it's full of endearments and very emotionally intimate thoughts. And nobody knew, we're used to it a bit now. If you've heard of Lorena Hickok, you're like, oh yeah, isn't she the one who maybe smooshed with Eleanor Roosevelt? But at the time, this was explosive. And it was 1978, like you said.
7 years after the first Pride March.
Yeah.
So it's all of this is still new. And Doris did not respond well to this.
No, she, in her own words, had the conniptions. Yes. And she asked for the director of the library. She went to the archivist and said, can I talk to the director? And they brought him in, and she begged, by her own admission, begged them to seal this stuff right back up. She didn't want anybody else to see it, and was willing to swear herself to secrecy. And the director, to his eternal credit, said no, for a couple of reasons. It has to do in part with the protocol of the National Archives. If you've let one researcher see, you can't bar information from others. And if you were going to selectively, okay, she said, just pull out the really juicy ones. But you would have to put a little pink slip indicating that something was missing. And that thing was just going to be a prairie of grass waving in the breeze if you took those out. So they said, no, that's going to raise questions. And the director himself decided there wasn't anything worthy of suppressing. So, it's been open ever since, thank goodness.
Yeah. And you said 3,500 letters.
Yes, it's an entire library cart full. They bring you 10 boxes of those gray archival boxes, and they hold 800 to 1,200 sheets apiece. And they're full. What
did it feel like sitting there doing that research, seeing this stuff, having your hands on?
I mean, the vast majority of it is photocopied. So, you're looking at their handwriting, which is great. They are photocopied, but there are a few folders where there's some originals. And I had to pause every now and then with a piece of paper to take an incredulous selfie with it, because I'm like, I'm touching this. And so did they.
To that end, folks hear about historical personages who might or might not have been this or that, just so that people have an understanding of what we're talking about. I was wondering if I could get you to read It's starts on 164.
Where their earliest surviving letters are addressed to Mrs. Roosevelt and Miss Hickok. By the early spring of 1933, Eleanor opened hers with Hick, my dearest, and Hick, darling. Hick's side of the correspondence is missing until November of 1933, and by then she'd taken to addressing Eleanor as my dear. Each time they parted, they punctuated their goodbye with their own tender little saying, if no one else was in earshot. Je t'aime et j'adore. I don't speak French, my apologies. Eleanor told Hick, French for I love you and I adore you. As a symbol of her commitment, Hick gave Eleanor a sapphire and diamond ring. Hick herself had received it from Ernestine Schumann Heink, the great Bohemian contralto, whom she had befriended during her years in Milwaukee. That history made the ring all the more meaningful, especially to Eleanor, who only cared for jewelry if it carried sentimental significance. Eleanor wore Hick's ring on her smallest finger, a location many female couples of the time used as a secret code to conceal their equivalent of a wedding ring in plain sight for the rest of her life.
For people who might be overly cautious, or reluctant to interpret past events in present light, there's a fair amount of evidence here in this correspondence that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean they say I love you again and again. It's written down. It's in their handwriting. They speak of embracing, of caressing, of kissing. That's all there in their own words.
There's a passage somewhere where, and I think it's Eleanor, talks about the little corner at the little
it's
bit
Hick,
at the corner of your mouth.
The northeast corner of Eleanor's mouth. I know.
All right, that established. Let's take things in chunks for people who are perhaps not familiar with this story. Hick had a miserable childhood by
sure did.
Dickensian standards. He had a miserable childhood.
She was a nobody from nowhere. She was, her father was abusive. Her mother was very passive about it. Hick was usually the one who was getting beat, and her mother would scold her for the beatings because, and her sisters, her littler sisters, could somehow just sort of dance out of their father's wrath, and Hick never figured out how to do that. So, the whole family was upset with her for being abused because it was unpleasant for them. So, what does that do to your mind when you're a kid, when you're the one who's singled out? There's really no other conclusion you can reach besides there's something wrong with me.
And she made that link through her body.
Yeah.
That I am this target because I'm the homely one, because I'm not,
Yeah, I'm physically punished beyond reason. And eventually there was sexual abuse after her mother's death, I presume. She was she was abused at home. She was made fun of on the playground. At age 14, she's thrown out of her house because her father has remarried the housekeeper after her mother's death, and they just are not going to have kids in their house. They've packed up the two younger sisters to relatives, and they say to 14-year-old Hick, you better do something about this because you don't live here anymore. So Hick goes out and finds a job. And she's elated to be thrown out of that house. Thank goodness I'm out of here.
Yeah. And what follows are a series of housework jobs through some of which bring her into contact with people, and she becomes aware, it's possible for folks to be kind.
Yes.
There are actually people who might be interested in my well-being, but it also brings her into contact with the opposite, folks who are there.
She even found a household that she thought was worse than her own, which is astonishing. The abuse wasn't directed at her in the same way, but just a profoundly unhappy household. And then others where she was welcomed and taken care of and shown basic things like how to wash your hair and how to put it up nicely. Nobody had taken the time and trouble to show her how to do really basic things. There was a woman who showed her how to do her work, her domestic duties, more efficiently. so she, and eventually, like, she wasn't getting howled at by these women that had hired her who were upset with her for being slow. She's like, I don't know how to do these things.
That system that we take for granted, certainly I did when I was a kid, that, yeah, people know how to do what I'm
People know how
supposed
to do stuff, right?
to.
You look at the big people and you do what they do. But yeah, the big people are busy yelling at you and pounding on you.
And when is this, Sarah? Wait,
She was born in 1893, so this is late 1800s, early 1900s, in Wisconsin and primarily in South Dakota is where the family landed. Her father's temper was such that he couldn't keep a job. He was always getting fired, so they bounced along through, I don't know, she'd lived in about 10 places by the time she was 10 or 11, and then they land in Bowdle, South Dakota. And that's where her mother died. That's where she's trying to make her own way from the ages of 14 to 16, roughly.
One of the turning points in Hick's young life, and this as somebody who spent 33 years in the classroom, was that a teacher took an interest.
A Latin teacher.
Yeah, I didn't want to have to point that out, but it's fine to bring it up. Yeah, a teacher takes an interest, sees that Hick has a skill with words and with writing, and puts her on a path that is going to define the rest of her life, really.
Yeah, there are a couple teachers who early on in South Dakota, she won an essay contest about Abraham Lincoln. She was chosen to perform in a declamatory contest, which she detested, public speaking. And then in Michigan, woo, Michigan, there's Allison Holt, the Latin teacher, who just kind of takes her under her wing. I suspect, I have no solid evidence for this, but I suspect that Allison Holt was a queer woman herself and recognized that in Hick perhaps before Hick did. So there's a connection there
and that stays
elaborate on.
Throughout a long part of Hick's life, right?
Yeah. They reconnect later as adults because Allison Holt was fresh out of college, so there's only 5 years between them. So, when Hick is grown, that difference doesn't matter anymore. But yeah, there's a correspondence between them that's also very close emotionally later. And then there's a professor at college who says, you shouldn't be here to learn to teach. You should be here to learn to write and to be a journalist.
I had that point of contact in history. My Latin teacher made me aware of a broader world where some of the things that I felt made me an outcast in my hometown, that might actually exist out there.
Yeah. And Professor Johnson in South Dakota, who, like, Hick's first remembered piece of writing is this snotty little rhyme that she wrote making fun of the teacher. And he was, just sort of looked down upon in the town because he had these big ideas about what kids should learn. And the locals were like, reading, writing, and arithmetic is what these kids need. And he wanted more for them. And Hick recognized later in her life that he was one of her heroes, really, because he insisted on teaching them more. At the time, she couldn't stand him. But,
isn't that always the way?
Yeah. In retrospect, she was like, wow, this guy really had a much broader view of the world than she knew existed.
So Hick starts pursuing a career in journalism, which is, to this day notorious for you pay your dues. That's a long time paying the dues. But at each point, she impresses people and she moves up. One of the stories that she is right in the thick of is the Lindbergh baby.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in 1932, that's the top story in the country. And the Associated Press put her on the beat. So that by that time, that's a very clear signal that she was at the top of her game by then.
And that's a great passage that you write in terms of Hick's involvement there, because it's a journalist's job is certainly the words and the craftsmanship, but it's also the investigation. And there's that line between what lengths will I go to get a story, and what is ethical, what is fair game. I'm dealing with this family that is grieving. How far do I push that line?
Yeah, and there's this moment where New York calls down to Hopewell, New Jersey, and says, "The baby's been found. He's in his mother's arms right now. Go get the story." And she's like, "There's no story. We'd have heard." But she sends somebody out, and to the police were using the Lindberghs' garage as their headquarters. And this long driveway, which was barricaded, so they couldn't even get past the barricade. There's nothing. So she reports that back. They think, no, 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 they found him. You've got to go. You've got to go. And she had very recently heard that there was this back way, this trail, literally up the mountain to the Lindbergh house. So in the middle of the night, it wasn't a blizzard then, but everything's frozen. She is slipping and sliding her way up the back of the mountain to the back of the Lindbergh property.
Hick, who is not perhaps the most athletic person.
No, no, she was not at all. So, and hoping like she's not going to get shot for creeping up the property where somebody's baby has been snatched in the night several weeks prior. And she gets up there and there's absolutely nothing happening. There is no story, just like she knew, but she slides back down the hill and promptly gets the flu.
So she builds this reputation. She ends up with a long-term job at AP, the most respected news source at the time. And in 1928, Al Smith, who's the governor in New York, decides he's going to run for president, and that leaves an opening in Gracie Mansion. Forgive me, I'm forgetting the name of the guy who ended up running.
Frank. Somebody?
Yes, that's it.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt?
Right, that's the one.
That's the guy.
I knew it was 3 letters. I was going to go with JFK, but I knew that was wrong.
Yeah.
This brings Hick into contact with the Roosevelt family and with Eleanor in particular. Walmart, Target, Amazon, Aldi's, McDonald's, and plenty more companies have caved to the government's anti-DEI policies. By caving to the president's demands, Brown, Columbia, and the University of Pennsylvania preserved hundreds of millions of dollars. The cost? Our First Amendment right to free speech. Across the country, medical institutions have caved by shutting down their gender-affirming care programs for trans folks under 19. Even here in True Blue, Connecticut, 2 of our 5 GAC providers caved over the summer. Not convinced yet? Ask Stephen Colbert. Ask Bill Owens, the executive producer of 60 Minutes. This Don't Cave sticker is the latest piece of Transqat merch. You can buy it from the store at transqat.com. Buy a bunch of them and spread them around. Historian Howard Zinn writes, "The state and its police were not neutral referees in a society of contending interests. They were on the side of the rich and powerful. Free speech. Try it, and the police will be there with their horses, their clubs, their guns to stop you. Transqat. We stand." First impressions?
First impressions of Mrs. Roosevelt, profoundly underwhelmed. Hick thought of Teddy Roosevelt, who at this point had been dead almost a decade. Teddy Roosevelt was, in Hick's mind, the president and one of her childhood heroes. So the chance to meet his niece was quite intriguing to her. And then she's confronted with this very tall, awkward-looking woman who wears a hairnet so tight it leaves a crease across her forehead. She's wearing what Hick called a black straw pancake on her head. And she has that famous Roosevelt mouth with the teeth that do what they do and the chin that does what it doesn't. And she's like, "Oh, you poor thing." But then she gets wind that Mrs. Roosevelt is headed to this political function. It's a ladies' function, and she's going to be debating head to head with a Republican woman who is very poised, very conventionally attractive, well known for her wit and her quickness on stage.
Society woman. Yeah.
Nick is just like, "Oh, geez, she's going to eat you alive," And the next day she finds out that exactly the opposite happened. The Republican lady lost track of some statistics that she wanted to quote to back up her arguments. And Eleanor Roosevelt, instead of, going, "Yes, point for my side," gave her the information that she was, just fumbling for. And that really intrigued Hick. She's like, that's a very graceful, selfless gesture who is this woman, really?
A woman of amazing character.
Yeah.
On the grand stage and in person. Speaking of which, get this right. Who is Mrs. Joe Dokes of Olwine, Iowa? I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but
Yep.
but who is Mrs. Dokes?
Mrs. Dokes is, shall we call her Hick's imaginary friend? Not quite. This was sort of an inside joke between Hick and Eleanor Roosevelt about how Hick later in their relationship, when she's working for the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, is driving all around the country trying to take in the effects of the Depression on everyday people and to find out how the relief system is functioning and whether it's serving people, and whether the people in need are receiving what they need. And her connection with the Roosevelts, which is well known by this time, just keeps dogging her. You know, people want to talk about Mrs. Roosevelt instead of what's really important. And she says, I wish with Mrs. Roosevelt is like the dearest friend I have. She's complaining to her boss's secretary, but I sometimes wish she was just Mrs. Joe Dokes of Olwine, Iowa, this nobody from the Midwest, so that they could just be friends and be together and not have all of this public hoo-ha. Because anytime they try to be together after about 1933, 1934, they're just dogged by the press, and it's infuriating. And so that became a joke between them of, think of me only as Mrs. Dokes, Eleanor says in one letter. And she was also peeved now and then, by that kind of attention.
I will be stealing. I didn't think I would ever be stealing quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt, but I am now changing from being a somewhat vulgar Irish woman to using "oh spinach" as my go-to. Oh spinach as my go-to expletive.
Okay, but you need access to this quote, which I think I ran across in the biography called "Just Eleanor" by, I can't remember the man's first name, but his last name is Michalis. Is, my dear, you can't flush all the toilets, which is code for you have to pick one cause. You can't clean up everything. You just pick one toilet and keep flushing.
That's how, even for folks who know nothing about Eleanor's personal life, have never heard the name Lorena Hickok, that's what she's famous for. She did so much as First Lady. And just to wind the clock back a little bit, the night of the inauguration, the night before the inauguration.
The night before the inauguration, I bet.
Eleanor is distraught, and she turns to Hick. And that, I was so glad that you included a picture of the statue in the book.
That is actually the day of the inauguration, right at that morning, I believe. She and Hick, Eleanor had said to Hick the night before, as they're getting off the train in Washington, D.C., there's something I'd like to show you tomorrow. Can you meet me at like 8:30 in the morning? And Hick says, well, sure, obviously. So they get into a cab the next morning and they drive to a cemetery. And Eleanor, guides the cabbie to this memorial, which is a statue of an androgynous figure in a robe, just sitting with one hand up at, like near their cheek in a sort of a pose like of repose or thought. And Eleanor sits down on one of the benches, and Hick can tell by her manner that this is a place Eleanor has been before and is sacred to her. And Eleanor is telling her about how much she dreads becoming First Lady. I suspect it's possible that this is when Hick might have learned about FDR's infidelity to his wife, because that is Eleanor's big secret, her big wound and her big secret, which is never revealed in her lifetime, that her ideals were shattered when she discovered that FDR was having an affair. She learned that in about 1918. Coincidentally, of course, World War I is going on at that time, so she throws herself into war work in order to sort of rebuild herself and have a sense of herself outside wife and mother identity. And she's very successful at that, and that's part of what brings her onto the public stage and precipitates her interest in others. And when she stands on the brink of becoming First Lady, which prior to Eleanor Roosevelt is a very ornamental role and a very social role. She's just devastated at the thought of having to give up all that work that makes her feel worthy and like herself to sit quietly in the White House and have tea with other ladies. And she can't tell anybody this. And when Franklin, when that secret was revealed to her and she was so shattered, she would come to this statue, which was commissioned by a man whose wife had taken her own life. And it was deliberately made androgynous, and so that anybody could look at this figure and feel their feelings of grief or whatever reflected. And for her, it was a very comforting place. And she wanted to share that with Hick in those last hours that she had of freedom, because she really considered the White House a cage.
And she was stepping into that cage for what both she and Hick presumed would be 4 difficult years.
Right. But of course, 4 years, we can do that, right?
Yeah, we can do that. It'll be tough, but we can do 4 years, and then we can spend our time together. We can go on vacations together, and nobody will be paying attention, and everything will be fine. And then 4 years turns into 8, and 8 turns into 12, and then FDR's elected for an unprecedented fourth term.
And it just someday is always so far away for them. It's just always receding on the horizon instead of coming closer.
And, you know, so obvious on the eve of election that there is a deeper link between Hick and Eleanor, that Hick is the one Eleanor chooses to unburden all these things that she can't tell anyone else.
Because so many of the Roosevelt's friends and Eleanor's friends were instrumental in getting FDR elected. They were very supportive of his political career all along, you know, through New York State and on the federal level as well, that I'm not sure if some of her other closest friends knew of her dread of the White House. Because how do you say that to people who have been spending years literally helping this man reach his goal? How do you say, well, hooray for him? You know? Wish it wasn't me.
I mean, there's a precedent and there's an example there for a lot of power couples, to use a 20th, 21st century phrase, right? That where that agreement that I'm going to give up X part of my life so that you can achieve your goals.
And it's interesting. The chronology is interesting because the affair that so wounded her was in the late teens. He's struck with polio in 1921, if I have my numbers right. And she nurses him through that and is instrumental in pushing back against his mother, who wants him to retire to just be a country squire, an invalid. And he still wants his career. And Eleanor, supports him despite how he's hurt her. She stands behind him, even though she had offered him a divorce at the time of the affair, and they patched it up and moved forward.
This relationship between Hick and Eleanor grows closer and closer. They are both able to share things with each other that probably anybody else in their lives doesn't know. I want to talk about what that does to Hick's career as a journalist at a time when journalism is rooted in the idea of objectivity. And it's very clear that Hick can no longer be objective about the Roosevelts. If you'd allow me, I'd love to read this passage. Maggie and Major, the dogs, dashed and scampered over the south lawn while a misty rain enveloped Hick and Eleanor. "You are very quiet," Eleanor said after a time. History had overwhelmed Hick. Not only the history of the White House and all its occupants, but her own past and everything that had inexplicably led her to this place and the woman who stood beside her. Quote, "I wanted to tell her about a salmon-colored schoolhouse set like a box in the center of a round, flat world," Hick later wrote, "of a green history book, of old men in blue marching along a blazing, dusty street on Memorial Day, of a child huddled close behind an old base burner coal stove on a bitter February night, writing an essay for a school prize on the 100th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. Hick couldn't. It was all so big and yet so small, she could not put it into words. I think there you get the sense of connection, what I was talking about, that these women shared things that mattered. This was not casual friendship.
And I'm glad you read that, because I would have had emotions.
But I also, I loved that in that I got to read Hick's writing.
Yes.
Which you did personally, right? You get to be there, but she's a damn good writer.
Yes, she is. And she had such a voice. Like, it's like talking to somebody. It's like listening to somebody. It's not like reading. If you've heard that voice, you will recognize it immediately. And yet, I mean, to loop back into the objectivity, when she's writing straight news, you can't identify her as Lorena Hickok. It's news.
Hi, folks. It's Clare interrupting. I'll keep this brief. Please consider donating to support the show. If you go to transqat.com, that's TRANSQAT.com, hit the support button and then donate. You can also visit the Transqat store and support us that way. And if you're a business or an organization, please consider sponsoring the show. We have a few slots left for season 3, but we will also be looking for sponsors for season 4. Thank you for your support. That's a theme running through your book, right? With the Eleanor can be Eleanor or she can be ER.
Yes.
Hick is the objective, professional, excellent journalist.
Yeah.
Or the human being with all the feels.
Yep.
And it costs her job at AP.
Yeah.
Now, technically, she quits.
She quits. She had thought that when she went back to New York, she was based in New York City, and when Eleanor Roosevelt enters the White House, she becomes the turf of the Washington, D.C. bureau. So Hick has to turn that beat over to another reporter. And she kind of figures that when I go back, all of this push-pull between my feelings and my work is going to end, because I'm going to be in New York City. Everything's going to be fine. I just have to get through until inauguration. She goes back to New York City, and everybody in the office, well, they think they know how close she is with the Roosevelts, but of course they don't really. And they expect what she called the dope on the Roosevelts. They wanted to know, like, well, what are they doing? What's going on? They wanted that inside info, and she would not divulge it because she knew how much Eleanor was struggling with her own role as First Lady. She also happened to know that 2 of the Roosevelt children were going to be divorced in the near future, and it's 1933, and that's just a scandal in and of itself, even if it's like today what would be a perfectly normal, parting of the ways. That was going to cause all sorts of commotion, and she had no intention of betraying Eleanor's feelings about all of this turmoil that she was going through. So she finally just quit. And she didn't just quit the Associated Press, she quit newspaper because of her prominence in the field. She knew, every paper from the New York Times to the most podunk little press knew that she had these connections and was going to expect her to make use of them professionally, and she wouldn't do it.
And so she then sets out on a series of jobs that the Roosevelts help her to put in place. The one with Farah being most prominent, you were referring to before, where Hick's job becomes going out and talking to people and getting their stories about how well or not the New Deal is working.
And it's tremendous work. It drained her emotionally to a huge degree, but she was so good at it. In part, paradoxically, because of how she looked and her manner. She'd always bemoaned the fact that nobody would ever call her cute or delicate or pretty or graceful. But when you're out in amongst these folks who are suffering, one man said to her, "Suppose you were my wife," and I bet you wish you weren't, because, they were in such dire straits, and you're sitting there in a worn out flour sack dress, and in comes some pretty young thing with her nails painted and her hair done, and she perches on the edge of your kitchen chair and starts asking a lot of personal questions. How would you feel? And Hick didn't have that effect on people because she had grown up in the Midwest, poor, and never felt herself to be attractive. She understood what these folks felt, and they could feel that. So she walked in and she wasn't looking down her nose. She was right there with them, and they told her everything. And to read those reports, I mean, it's great fun because of her voice, and it's devastating because of the things that she's hearing. She tells it so well, and she's writing back to her boss in Washington, D.C., and she does not sound bureaucratic or formal or highfalutin or anything. It's like you can imagine yourself sitting across from the kitchen table, and she's pounding her fist on the table as she's telling you these things and what these people need. Get these people what they need. There's one letter that says something like, "Damn it, I don't want to write to you tonight, but I have to because these folks," she's so tired and so worn out by all of that downward pull of everyone's circumstances, but she just kept pushing on.
And the effect of that is multiplied because on the one hand, she's informing FDR of what pieces are working and what are not, what needs to be refined. And, eventually Farah becomes the WPA and the Social Security Administration. But she's also writing this to Eleanor, who is approaching the more humanistic aspect of it. And, okay, what can be done for these people?
Right.
So her words spread out and have multiple effects.
Yeah, and so she's able to convey what people need to her boss, and she's also conveying so much more emotionally to Eleanor about her own state of mind, in addition to the folks that she's been talking to. And like the most tangible example is the community called Arthurdale in West Virginia, which Eleanor Roosevelt really spearheaded the building of that community. There was a group of miners that were just living in abject poverty. And Eleanor Roosevelt was aware, that it was bad there. But the letters that she got from Hick describing individuals and the things that they were living through in these coal camps where the mines were only maybe working once a week, one day a week, spurred her to come and actually see it with her own eyes. And when she saw it with her own eyes and was appalled by the way these folks were living, she went right home. This is like in the spring, summer, and by the fall, the federal government is building these pretty little houses for a subsistence community, and the miners and their families, many of them are selected to live in this community. And it just, one woman said something like, we woke up one morning in hell, and we went to bed that night in heaven, because that was the day they moved.
Oh.
These houses that had indoor plumbing and, floors.
Right. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Not dirt. But it also, coming through Hick's work, is the idea that these Americans, these people, do not want a damn handout.
Right.
They want work.
Yep.
They want to be doing things with their hands that will give their lives meaning. Do not,
even if it was what was called maid work, like digging a ditch or planting trees or whatever, washing windows. People hated these. They were food orders, these grocery orders. You had to go, like your mommy had sent you with the grocery list, and you had to give it to the grocer, and they would give you what was on the list. They were like, no, we want dollars and cents that we can then spend as our families need.
Show me that respect
Yes.
as a human being. And that, I've got to imagine, that only happens if you have someone who can tell the story in human terms. And
right.
That's our imaginary friend, Sarah.
Yeah.
As we said, 4 years becomes 8 years, becomes 12 years. And the distance between Eleanor and Hick starts to widen. Reality, the best of intentions, but different worlds taking them in different directions. And even though Hick ends up having a house and finding comfort in pets, depression sets in.
Yeah, she wrestled with that her whole life, it seems. It's one of those things where, of course, we can't diagnose, but the signs are, are there. That especially like during her work with Farah, she was very depressed and she struggled financially from the time she quit the AP. So yeah, she always just she had a rough time, but Eleanor Roosevelt always has this safety net ready to spread out under her. Hick didn't always want that because she had some pride, but Eleanor was always of the mind that, like, if I can help you, let me do this. This doesn't hurt me. It benefits you. And Hick wasn't always able to accept that, but it was always there.
Bringing up the mental health issue, it seems parallel to me to something that we talked about when you were still working on the book, and that is language.
Mhm.
You cannot look at mental health in the beginning of the 20th century and comfortably or easily use the terms that we have at the beginning of the 21st century. The same thing with the queer issue. And
Yep.
we talked about the word queer and how do you decide what word actually fits the First Lady of the United States and this reporter who never, I'm correct in saying this, right, never publicly said, here's my
Yeah,
identity.
there's no sentence in Hick's handwriting that says I am a lesbian, I love women. You have to infer it from the fact that all of her known relationships are with women. And I mean, she said she distrusted men. Now she blamed that on her father and the abuse, and she just disliked men, period.
Yeah.
But, in retrospect, we can look back and say there's more going on there. Whether or not she knew that at a young age, I'm not sure. But yeah, there's a lot packed into that.
So how did you approach language in the book? You know what I
There
mean?
are
What?
very few. I don't know that I ever label anybody because it's not my business. I mean, I feel very comfortable saying that Lorena Hickok was a lesbian. That's what I believe, and I think that is a reasonable conclusion. I feel not everybody's going to agree with me, but I feel very comfortable saying Eleanor Roosevelt was queer. She had deeply intimate, emotionally, physically, we don't know sexually, we just don't know relationships or relationship with Hick. Obviously, it's there in their own writing. She also deeply loved her husband and other men later in her life that she was very close to emotionally, for sure. Beyond that, it's unclear. So I think under those circumstances, it's very safe to say Eleanor Roosevelt was queer. How she would have identified herself, given all the tiny little pigeonholes that we have nowadays
Right.
to fit ourselves neatly and comfortably into if we want to, I don't know. Was she bi? Was she pansexual? Was she asexual?
Yeah.
Because there is no mention of sex in any of this correspondence. And we don't know if that's because it's the 1930s and you just don't do that, or because they just didn't do that, because what they had that we can see on paper could have been enough for them.
So to bring it back to where we started, FDR dies, Eleanor dies, Hick is the last of the three standing,
Yep.
and she has all this correspondence. How does she deal with that?
Hick tells us that it was Eleanor's wish that that correspondence be included in the Presidential Library's collection. So Hick in 1958, while Eleanor is still living, Eleanor died in 62. So in 58, she begins donating the correspondence bit by bit, with the condition that it not be opened until 10 years after Hick's own death. And she includes in those donations not just her correspondence with Eleanor Roosevelt, but also her correspondence with Allison Holt, the Latin teacher we mentioned earlier, and correspondence with a woman named Marion Heron. Those files, it's only the other women's end of the conversation. We don't have Hick's letters, but it's clear abundantly clear that both of those women loved and or were in love with Hick. So she's making it clear that this Eleanor Roosevelt thing wasn't just a fluke. You know, she has had very close, emotionally intimate relationships with other women. And so it's her own, she's basically engineering her own coming out after her death. And the fact that Eleanor Roosevelt wanted that material preserved also speaks to Eleanor's character. Um, and it seems to me, a friend of mine helped me realize this, that as he put it, she saw the arc of history. I see it a little more personally in that, she was very close with many other queer women. There were at least three female couples and one in particular that she was very, very close with. And so I see it as her saying to us, I saw that their love was okay. And I had those feelings too. And I want you to know that that's okay.
Sarah, I was wondering if you would take us out on a passage of your choosing.
Oh, man.
I know. A good host would have prepped you for this.
Ooh, you're wicked.
While you're looking, the picture, I don't remember if I passed the comment on to you, but I remember when you described the photograph of Eleanor that Hick loved.
Yes.
I go, please make sure that's in there. And
yes.
And it is. And you're right. That smile, that sort of.
Yep. And those, the gloves that, she's clearly just wiggling her fingers into. Because apparently when Eleanor Roosevelt was on the move, she was a very graceful person to see. When you see her in pictures, she always looks sort of awkward, and her clothes often aren't quite tailored to her frame.
Right.
Because she also didn't fit the mold of what a woman was supposed to look like. But to see her in the flesh was different. Many people besides Hick remarked on that.
Oh, let me also toss out there while you're talking is that I will, when I go back in time, I'm going to beat up Ellie Morse. I'm going to find her and I'm going to hurt her. How dare you?
I know, it's so hard. It's so easy to be angry at her, and yet Hick loved her forever.
Yeah.
And brought Eleanor, like, here is the woman that I love now. And by the way, she's the first lady. And let's all go on a picnic together. And it works. And yes, you can bring your no-account husband. But, that's another example where queer fits Ellie. Because, for 8 years, she had been with Hick in a committed relationship. And then all of a sudden, she goes off and elopes with a dude. Like, what? What is happening here? Maybe that little bit just about Hick's name. Page 75.
Oh, it also, I had to go to the dictionary. I was not familiar with the word pecksniff.
I wasn't really either. That's one of the things I was just doing by context. Like, okay, pecksniffs aren't good.
No, it's from Dickens, apparently.
Okay.
I looked it up, and it's a character in Dickens.
But I do like this little bit because it is sort of Hick's transformation from Lorena Hickok to the reporter that she became. Somewhere in the clatter and clamor of the city room, Lorena Hickok faded into the clouds of tobacco smoke and profanity. In her place emerged a reporter known simply as Hick. She'd always hated her name, and now she openly corrected anyone who tried to use it. Not, I beg of you, Lorena, she once griped to a colleague. It sounds like a patent medicine ad. Hick she was, and Hick she would be for the rest of her life. Only a handful of adored folks who'd known her as a child, folks like Aunt Ella, the Brownings, or Miss Alicent Holt, could get away with calling her Lorena, Raina, or anything else but Hick. Before long, Hick could drink, play poker, and swear as well as any of the men, alternating hell and damn as punctuation marks, one reporter noted of her. She smoked a pipe and put her feet up on her desk. Many Pecksniffs judged her by her pipe, another of her male colleagues sneered. Her associates judged her by her competence. Her competence had grown mighty.
Sarah, thank you so much for this.
Do we have to stop? This is fun.
I know. And thank you so much for this as well.
You're welcome.
Librarians, go buy this book. People, go buy this book. And we're off on another season of Transqat. I like the idea that we begin with a history lesson. And it wasn't until I was editing the show that I paid close attention to the passage that Sarah chooses at the end of this episode. Hick changed her name. She built a professional identity for herself that transgressed gender boundaries. Her gender expression, the way she carried herself, her comfort and acceptance in the boys' club of the newsroom, all that was masculine. Her gender identity was not. Her sexual orientation, whatever that might have been, was that of a woman. This puts her seat at the heart of the queer section, where I can sit and talk with my imaginary friend. Next up on Transqat.
But I just didn't have words. I didn't have vocabulary to express what was happening. I just kind of didn't say anything. And then as I got older, it kind of got to be this more like, okay, well, you need to stop being that way. You got to stop being who you are and start conforming to what society expects of you. So I did all the girly things. I was a cheerleader. I was on prom court. I went so hard into that direction because I thought that's what was expected. And it really wasn't until I was in my 20s that I met another trans person. And I remember just having this moment of like, oh, that's the word. That's the word I've been looking for. This is a thing. And it was like life-saving for me because for so long I just spent my life thinking I was like broken. Like there was something wrong with me. I must be crazy. I must be there must be something wrong. And then I met this person and they were fine. They were just living their lives. And I was like, oh, cool. That's amazing. And it shifted my perspective. And it was really funny. A lot of people were surprised, but my now wife at the time, we just started dating, but she's been my best friend since we were little kids, like 8 years old. And so she was the first person I came out to. And she was like, yeah, I'm more. I figured. And I was like, girl, when were you going to tell me?
If you've enjoyed my conversation with Sarah, and I hope you have, consider checking out other episodes with authors. As I look over the Transqat archive, which now contains 96 episodes, I have to admit, I have a penchant for talking with writers. In episode 63, I spoke with Abby Maxwell about her heartbreaking memoir, One Day I'll Grow Up and Be a Beautiful Woman, about surviving and protecting her trans daughter in a hostile New Hampshire town. Episode 57 was with political cartoonist Eric Orner, whose graphic novel Smat Guy chronicles the life and career of Congressman Barney Frank. And of course, there are 3 conversations with friend of the show Elliot Schrafer. I recommend episode 19, where we discuss his YA nonfiction book, Queer Ducks and Other Animals. This has been Transqat. I'm Clare McCarthy. Thank you for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece.
And you've just been listening to Transqat. It is made by one of my favorite people in the world, Clare McCarthy.
Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC.
Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Join us on the web at transqat.com.
That's TRANSQAT.com.
QAT.com.
QAT.com.
There you'll find links to Transqat, the blog,
writing projects,
speaking engagements,
and our PayPal donations page.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monkeys.
Monies.
Your monies.
Your monies.
Not monkeys.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
On TikTok, we are at The Real Transqat.
Want to tell your story on air?
or ask Claire a question.
What is the deal?
She has all the answers.
Or suggest a guest or topic for an upcoming episode.
Use the contact page at the website
or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com.
crmtranscat@gmail.com.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.